And from Whispers from Eternity, this is prayer demand 170. Teach me to drown in thy light and live. I come to thee with the song of my smiles. Whatever treasures have lain in the secrecy of my soul, I bring eagerly to thee. I bring thee all the honey from the hive of my heart. All that was ever mine is now thine alone. The sunlight of this world shining upon my eager hopes and brief, fickle fulfillments burned me repeatedly with dissatisfaction. Now I will quench my thirst forever in thy radiant waters. The taper of my aspiration towards happiness will burst aflame with thy coming into a conflagration of bliss. In thy vast, enchanting sea of light, I will swim joyfully forever. Teach me to drown in thee and live, rather than live in a mirage paradise of earthliness and die. Just a little something light to start off our Sunday service. Today's topic is one that could be picked up from many threads, and I enjoy also hearing how everyone would pick up a particular topic because it speaks so differently to every heart and to every moment and in every year. And some of you have been hearing this topic talked about longer than I've been on this planet. And so there are, many different ways a flower can bloom. But what was creeping into my heart as I was meditating on this topic, what is the best way to worship? And there could be many answers, with deep love, with great devotion, with servicefulness, with wisdom. There are many answers. But the answer that kept coming to me when I was trying to meditate and tune into Christ's words, in spirit and in truth. This is a deep invitation. When Christ says that, that's no shallow pond for us to skip the rock of our attention over, but it's one for us to dive very deeply into. What does he mean by that? In spirit and in truth. And it's interesting, of course, that line is in one of Swami Kriyananda's songs from the Oratorio, which perhaps many of you are familiar with. And it's from the song Living Water, where Swami Kriyananda takes that line and extends it into an entire melody, which is incredible. And it says so much. And actually that song in particular was one of the first experiences I had with a super conscious touch with divinity. And as such, it's always remained as a dear contact point for me. Whenever I think of that song or whenever I think of its words, it brings something very special to my heart. And in fact, I think that's exactly what Christ is talking about when he says we must worship God in spirit and in truth. That we can't merely worship in outward superficial acts. That it's not that once we learn the magic incantation of this mantra or that you'll be saved, or if you build 10 hospitals, or if you work 80-hour weeks, then you can get your liberation. But it's that we need to attune our hearts to God's heart. We need to draw our vibration into his. That's what he means when he says God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit. And if you think about it, this isn't as esoteric as perhaps it may sound superficially. But if someone were to play a piece of music and they played it with no soul, we would all tell, right? We would say, well, you played the notes, but you didn't play the music. And the same is for us when we sit to worship. You said the words, but did you sing the melody of divine love? Yes, you practiced the meditation technique, but did you do it with deep devotion? Yes, you practiced, but did you dive deep? Did you surrender yourself? And Swami Kriyananda beautifully says that all the techniques of yoga cannot give you God, but they can allow you to give yourself to God. And that's what it means to worship God in spirit. Because the Spirit of God is all generosity itself, is all giving itself, is all love itself. And when we learn to love God in that way, we draw him to us, don't we? But when we're always clawing and grasping and hoping to gain something from God, he slips away. And it's always us crying out in the darkness, alone. But when we learn to open our heart and give of ourselves, then suddenly we find His presence there stealing into our own hearts. And that's perhaps some of what it means to worship God in spirit. And I think we've all experienced this, otherwise you probably wouldn't be sitting here. If you hadn't felt the presence of God in your heart in some form of worship, why would you believe? Why would you be here? Wouldn't then the skeptical part of your mind have won out and you'd be doing something else with your Sunday morning? Yet here we sit. Here we are. Why? Because we have tasted that Spirit. Because it has touched us. And our hearts are restless until it finds its rest in Thee, as one of the great saints put it. And so let's not fool ourselves, is actually what I mean to say by all of this. Let's not fool ourselves with outward pleasantries, with outward show of our devotion, with being content to check the boxes of our practices and of our attendance. But let's make sure that we are drinking of that living water of the presence of God in our own daily sadhana. That's what Swami Ananda stresses most of all in this reading, that we must have an inner communion with God. That, as we say every week in the Festival of Light, though the lower taper, though the many lights of good works are still lit, the noble taper of inner communion burns low and is ill-attended. And that's what this reading is all about, is let us together, united in Christ's love, set light of flame again to that noble taper of inner communion with the Lord. That's what these masters have come to give us. That's what we as their disciples have come to do, is to join them in that act of worshiping God in spirit and in truth. And then, as if the bar wasn't already high enough there, when I was reading Swami discuss and expand upon this topic, when he blew my mind metaphorically when he said that to worship God in truth means to worship God in samadhi, to go so deep into that inner communion that you become God and that God becomes you. And at that point you might as well just close the book for a moment and blink until your brain comes back to you, because I haven't yet accomplished that. So have I not yet worshipped? Well, of course not. Of course, we all have, in a way. And something that is continually inspiring to me is, as above, so below. Whatever is true in the highest plane of spiritual truth exists also in the most mundane, most practical, most down-to-earth way. And so too for all of us in our own practice. Have you ever felt peace before? Have you ever felt calmness? Have you ever felt love? This is the presence of God. There is a beautiful recording, I believe, of Durga Mata, one of Yogananda's great disciples. And I haven't actually heard it. I've only heard this secondhand. But apparently in this recording, she sort of says in this very charming voice, "The love you feel in meditation, that is God." And that is God. That is what we're looking for. And if you have felt that, you have felt the presence of God within you. You have worshipped God in truth. That's what it means. That's why we have our daily sadhana practice. That's why we take that vow to practice twice daily. Not so we can, show up at the pearly gates and declare that we have practiced, whatever 365 times 50 would be for 50 years of Kriya practice, but so that we go deep into that superconscious state every day. As John says in the Bible, "Verily, I declare I die daily." That's what this is encouraging all of us to do. And from my heart to yours, I invite all of us, let's do that. Let's take up that noble taper, that incredible invitation from Christ and the Masters to live in this way, to live with the determination to touch the vibration of God every day. And then slowly, by broadening our hearts with kindness, as Karen sang so beautifully in that song, to learn to expand that love into all parts of our life, but so we can go deeper, ever deeper, into that vibration in our inner practice. This world is a dream. This world means nothing in and of itself. All the greatest deeds in the world would amount to nothing if they were done without the consciousness of God. And yet the greatest masters can sit remotely in a mountain and do more good for the world simply by the power of their magnetic radiations. Such is the power of the superconscious mind. And we've all been touched by that superconscious mind, I would venture to say, each one of us. So at some point in our life, that light has come in and touched you. It has touched me. And what's beautiful, Swami Kriyananda writes elegantly that whatever the light of God touches is transformed forever. This is how you can know if it was a true superconscious experience and not idle imagination, did it change you? When you remember it, does it fill your heart with joy? And we all have these memories, I think. And we should cultivate them. We should tend to them. We should care for them like a garden in our heart. One of Swami Kriyananda's songs is, "Love like a garden needs tending daily." Love for God like a garden needs tending daily. Let's care for that little rose of our inner experience of God's presence until it grows strong, vibrant, and beautiful. And then we can waft in the breeze the aroma of that joy to all. But first we need to find God within before we can find Him without. In this beautiful song that Karen sang, the young girl meets Christ through the compassion of her love. But if we can't see God, if we cannot find God first within ourselves, we'll only overextend in trying to love others with our little heart. As Yogananda said, how can the little cup hold the entire ocean? And this is why meditation is so important, that inner communion, that true contact with the superconscious mind. Because as we've all heard, Swami Kriyananda often gave the example of trying to fix ourselves piece by piece would be like trying to rearrange the molecules in a bar of steel to become a magnet. It would be hopeless. By the time you fixed one, all 15 others would already have gone chaotic again. But the superconsciousness is like being tapped by an incredible voltage of such power that in an instant it can rearrange the very essence of who you are and change you forever with an indelible mark of the presence of God. And I know this is sounding perhaps a little out of reach, but again I say to you, this is, I think, more common than we realize. If you've ever felt that sense of expansion, be it sitting on top of a beautiful mountain watching a sunset, or be it in the midst of the most tumultuous section of your life, and yet inside you feel the hand of God in your heart. That is the superconscious light, and it is that light that can come in and heal us. And I was meditating yesterday, and in a way, it feels like there's a lot of pain in the world today, doesn't it? There's a lot of grief in the hearts of men. And one could ask and one could wonder how we could possibly overcome all those griefs and all those pains and all the troubles that the world has. And we could make policies and we could make all this, that, and the other, which are all good, but they're not the ultimate answer. And I felt my heart go out in a burst of energy and compassion because I realized what everyone is actually seeking is that panacea, that balm of God's presence. And like Lakshmi shared, we had a retreat on Lahiri Mahashaya's teachings and his legacy yesterday. And that was one of his great teachings, that Kriya Yoga is the panacea of all suffering, that it can cure all delusion, not because of some esoteric elements within us, though it does rely on that, but because it brings us into contact with God Himself. It brings us into contact with that superconscious force. And once we touch into that, we are changed forever. And that you may, as Yogananda said, have a darkness within you that has been present for 1,000 years, but if you flip on the light, it was gone, as if it never existed. And there's, some humorous examples, and there's some very touching examples. There's, a story of a contemporary of St. Joseph of Cupertino's, who was a levitating saint and a great disciple of Christ. And this Protestant man who didn't believe in saints went to visit Joseph of Cupertino. And when he was there, Cupertino went into an ecstatic state and took that man, and they both began to levitate. And afterwards, the Protestant said, "I went up a Protestant and I came down a Catholic." Because he was changed forever by what happened to him. And I think if we all searched our hearts, we'd probably say something similar happened, though perhaps in a different degree. That's why I began to meditate. Something happened inside that changed me forever. And when people who are not yet on this path ask me, "What changed? You're so different. How are you doing this?" How can you explain? I went up a Protestant and I came down a Catholic. There's no going back. But if that light in meditation seems distant, vague, or undefinable to you yet, don't give up. It will come. It will come. It will steal upon you like a thief in the night. In fact, my deepest experiences in meditation, I don't think I earned at all. They just sort of were like plopped on my lap as a special dispensation of God's grace. And I say that merely to say that if you feel like, I don't know that I'm meditating so deeply that I'm going to have a touch of God. Well, hey, me too. But yet it happens. And actually, the other thing that I wanted to touch in upon is when you are touched by that superconscious light, you begin to become that superconscious light. And that's how we can then begin to share in our kindness and in love and in an ever-expanding heart with all of our fellow human beings. And this is surely what we all want. All of us want to live a purposeful and a meaningful life. But what could be more meaningful than to be able to give the ultimate gift of God's love to everyone? But if, again, as I was saying, that light seems distant or unavailable, unattainable, even if you believe that it couldn't possibly exist, I couldn't blame you if that was what you thought. But ask yourself this: can you believe in the light that you see shining behind the eyes of your friends and the light you see shining behind the eyes of those who have walked this path for their entire life? I say I can. Swami Kriyananda pointed out that if one person were extraordinary, you could simply write it off as being them as an individual. But that if a whole group of people were extraordinary, you must begin to ask, what is it that they're doing? And that's what I see when I look at our great family of devotees and gurubhais in this path of Ananda. I see people who have trod it for 30, 40, 50 years, and I see saintliness in them. And I think all of us must, certainly, if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. And so, look for the light within one another. Commune with that light within one another. Don't pay attention to one another's foibles and flaws and shortcomings, but see God in one another and draw on that godliness from one another. When I was in a program called Living Discipleship a few summers ago with some friends of mine, I was with about 25 odd other devotees about my age and some lovely, lovely souls. And though my personality might not have meshed perfectly with every single one of them, when we sat in a circle at the close of our program, I looked around and I realized every single one of these people embodied deeply some spiritual quality that I greatly admired. And it was a wonderful blessing to get to spend the time with them, because all of them had been touched by God in a particular way. And in that particular way, they were wondrously beautiful. And I wished that I could commune with that God in them. And so we can do that together. With every single interaction that we have with one another, we can touch into the light of God within each other. And not only will that bless you, but it will bless them, for you are drawing the highest from them. And in this way, too, we can learn to relate and draw on magnetism from our spiritual teachers and from our guru, of course. And the song that I alluded to, Living Water, the lyric says, if you are fallen deep in sin and are abandoned by all men, if you're still longing for the grace of God, truth be your guide. And again, truth is not just like, I'm not going to tell a lie, but the truth of God, that dynamic reality that God is love. God is light. God is joy. God is present within you. God, and then it goes on, says, He can redeem you from any evil. Friend, only think of Him. Walk by His side. And that's where I was hoping to go with that last segment. That yes, we should do that with the Guru. Think of Him always. And in that contact, His superconscious magnetism will begin to be transferred to you. But also think of Him when you're with His Gurubhais or with His disciples. Because the power of the Guru lives on in the disciples that are in tune with Him. So think of the Guru when you mix with your spiritual family. And through them you can feel their power lifting you on that magic carpet, deeper into your meditation, deeper into your remembrance of God. And then you too can bless them in the same way. So my friends, I think to conclude, I'd just like to invite all of us that whatever troubles you may have, whatever ambivalences, whatever troubles you, let's seek to overcome that, as Lahiri Mahashaya said, through the practice of Kriya Yoga, which if you do have the technique, literally so, but if you don't, it means through the inner communion with God, by going so deep into the silence that you forget yourself and you become spirit, even for just a moment. And let's all endeavor together this week to try and touch into that consciousness at least once. And I think we all have before. And if you're anything like me, There can be a little part of your mind that begins to be seduced by the daily rhythm of Maya that tells you that superconscious experience is rare and you're lucky if it comes once a blue moon. Don't believe that. That superconscious experience can come every day. It can come every day. It can come in any moment if we simply pause and open our hearts to God. Teach me to drown myself in thy light and live, rather than live in earthliness and die. So let's just remember that, not in a heavy way, but in an aspirational way, remembering what it is that our hearts truly are seeking, that sweet nectar of the divine presence, remembering that all wounds are healed at last and completely in the presence of God. And that, as it says in Autobiography of a Yogi, the man of self-realization influences the entire universe by the spiritual radiations of his consciousness. So if you wish to help the world, if you wish to help one another, if you wish to help yourself, get in tune with the power behind all creation. And as that song says, He can redeem you from every evil. Friend, only think of Him. Walk by His side. God bless you.
A poor little girl walking in the cold, her clothing all tattered and thin, spied a rich man standing outside a church, outside a church, outside a church. Spied a rich man standing outside a church, the service about to begin. Please, sir, she said, hear an orphan child. The cold winds of winter have come. I've no place to live, not in all the world. Oh, help me find work in some home. The rich man frowned. Don't you hear that hymn? Good people have gathered in prayer. It's a day for worship, impious girl, impious girl, oh impious girl. It's a day for worship, impious girl. Don't speak here of earthly affairs. He turned then and entered the holy church. The girl wandered down the cold street, and there all at once she beheld a small boy, no jacket, no shoes for his feet. His clothing was shabby, as worn as her own. He shivered against a closed door. Alas, he cried, none will take me in. Take me in, none will take me in. Alas, he cried, none will take me in. Though I'm starving and cold, for I'm poor. Seeing him, she cried, how I feel for you. It's bitter with no friends to live. Here, please take my shawl, it's all I can spare, though it's shameful so little to give. She wrapped him all up in the flimsy cloth and kissed his cold forehead and smiled. Suddenly, a warmth like a summer breeze, like a summer breeze. Suddenly, a warmth like a summer breeze encircled that small girl and child. And a tender voice said, "My daughter, I'm here. No more shall you weep without friends. For in yonder church there's no love like yours. Those with pure hearts, their needs I attend." My child, all men's sorrows would turn to joy if they knew that to share is no loss. For its kindness softens the human heart, the human heart. For its kindness softens the human heart. I know, I who died on the cross. Worship means but love, and my love you found by your gift to me here in the cold. And she saw their clothes were now woolen and warm, and the shawl was now spun of fine gold. Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy. Where there's hatred, may